Welcome to whatever I've decided to call this, Public Politics Live, I think. I'm going to start off very quickly. So we're going to work on particular topics. So on Saturday, we did a quick live stream just to test everything out. That was just a general free-for-all. So the idea will be a particular topic or two topics and then a general Q&A at the end in the last 20 minutes. I think it's fairly obvious that today's topic will have to be well, I don't actually know, how do you characterize this with Johnson's Partygate fine? What is the big issue at the moment? Is it his criminality or is it the lies? Because, you know, both are ruinous. I am actually just going to pick out a comment. So someone said, sorry, a couple of comments that happened before the stream went live that I wanted to just pick up with. Someone here saying, this is important to get out of the way, morality aside, does getting a fixed penalty notice without criminal conviction really define as criminal? Even informally thinking of seatbelt, bus lane, U-turn offences, aren't most of us then criminals? There is a criminal conviction. Now, this is something the Conservatives are trying to hoodwink people over. Because Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, when it comes to it, were issued with a fixed penalty notice by the police and were not prosecuted in court, they think, well, it's not a conviction. It is a conviction. It's an actual criminal conviction. It doesn't go on a record in the same way. That is true, but it is still a criminal conviction. And some people will think, well, hang on a minute, is it really fair? Is it right to let the police decide who is and who is not a criminal? Isn't that for the courts to decide? That is exactly why, if you receive a fixed penalty notice from the police, you have the right to challenge it and have your case heard in court. So Boris Johnson had the right. It's all right him saying, well, you know, I had this view and the police have taken this view, and all right then. As if that's all there is to it, as if he has to accept the judgment of the police. He doesn't. He could have gone to court and then the court would have found him guilty. But if he'd have done that, then it's more difficult. Like, for example, Bill Cash, Sir William Cash, Tory MP. He tried saying in the Commons yesterday that it's a civil offence, not a criminal offence. Now, that was a lie, because he's a solicitor, he will know. It's not. It was a breach of criminal law. If it was a breach of civil law, the police wouldn't be issuing fines. It would be the council or an individual. It wouldn't be the Met Police. So yeah, it is a criminal conviction. It won't show up on any job application, like, you know, DBS checks or anything. Not that you'll ever need any of those anyway. Can I just change my microphone to mono mode? I really don't know how at all, I'm afraid. I think we did have this on Saturday and I said I'd look into it and I couldn't find anything, but I will keep looking. It is still on my list of things to try and track down what the issue is. But there's no easy settings on, there's no buttons to press. It'll be software somehow. And then another thing I'll just point out, because it was a super chat, I will have to clean up the language. It says, if you see this, I saw it. Do I think Boris Johnson is a lying expletive deleted? Of course he is. There are certain things that are now no longer causes of speculation. One, Boris Johnson is a liar. Two, he's a criminal. And three, he's lied about his criminal activities. But the well, you say it right. So John's saying there, Johnson won't go to court as he would face perjury charges. Well, it's two things about that. I don't know whether you're aware. Andrew Bridgen, who's a Tory MP, has just a judge has said that he lied in court under oath. And I'll be honest, I don't know why perjury charges aren't forthcoming there. I don't understand the circumstances that would mean. I remember politicians in the past. I don't wish to throw accusations around about particular parties, but I remember Jonathan Aitken and Geoffrey Archer, who were both Conservatives. I don't deny that politicians from other parties might not perjure themselves from time to time. They went to prison for it. Why is Andrew Bridgen not even being prosecuted? But again, the So if Boris Johnson, first of all, when it goes to court, it's not full open court. If you challenge a fixed penalty notice, it's a magistrate's court and it's behind closed doors. There's no reporting or anything like that. The magistrate looks at the case, listens to the arguments, and then just makes their judgment. So, but there you go. The optics look very bad on Fabricant. Well, that comment could be taken more than one way, couldn't it? Michael Fabricant, of course, who was the one who was smirking when he was being told about one of his constituents that died without having loved ones around them, and the other one, of course, who wasn't able to be near them. But anyway, if I'm on Windows, I can set my audio to mono in the settings. No, I'm not. Disappointed that Starmer didn't call BJ a lying criminal every time he asked a question today. Well, he's not allowed, you see. And I know some people will think, oh, it's worth it. If you, like Dawn Butler did and like Ian Blackford has done, call him a liar and then get kicked out and it makes a statement. I know some people have said things like, shouldn't MPs just walk out and things like that? No, because that's what Boris Johnson would love. He'd love that. That doesn't do him any harm at all. It's actually far better for Keir Starmer to do what he did yesterday, because I don't know whether people noticed, if you watched Keir Starmer's actual speech, there was a point in the middle where he described Boris Johnson as dishonest. Tory MP, he'd shut the Tory MPs up at that point, but then they all roared out, oh, you can't say that, you can't say that. Eventually the Speaker said he should withdraw the remark. But what I'd like you to do, if you've not, or if you have seen the speech, watch it again. Before as he was calling Boris Johnson dishonest, he was looking at the Speaker. Now, it is quite common to keep looking at the Speaker because you're supposed to be talking to the Speaker, but he was casting sideways glances from the moment he called him dishonest for like the next minute until the Speaker stopped it. He was glancing at him. He knew the Speaker would intervene. He was probably quite surprised that the Speaker didn't intervene immediately. So Starmer knew what he was doing there. He knew that it would cause a ruckus, and he knew. So, because then what happened? He didn't actually withdraw it. He sort of did and he sort of didn't. The Speaker said he should withdraw it and use different language. Keir Starmer says he takes the point, he takes the ruling without vocalising that he was withdrawing it. And then he said that the Prime Minister knows what he is. So it was all planned. And that's the sort of thing to do. You hint at it. There's ways of hinting at it that don't get you in trouble. Every now and then just ramp it up by slipping one out. Speaker intervenes, he goes, oh, okay. But they all know what he is. They all know what he is. I would just keep doing that. Right, there's a super chat here. DC says, thank you for my informative videos. Would love my opinion if I think the planned Scottish independence referendum will happen next year, and if so, what I think the outcome will be. Well, two things for that is don't know and don't know, but I don't know when the SNP and the Greens together, of course, are in charge of that. They have the majority in Holyrood. They will, at the end of the day, they're like any political party, okay? They are going to carry out things when it's politically advantageous to them. That is why they will, it's a bit like a chancellor, and it's not necessarily a Tory chancellor. I remember Gordon Brown did this as well. They come up with tests. Oh, we'll do this if it meets these 5 economic tests. And then the economic tests are so spurious, they can either be met or not met whenever they want. Same thing with the SNP. They're saying, oh, we're going to do it when COVID is over. Well, COVID might not be over for 10 years. So what they actually mean is they'll do it when they think it's politically advantageous. And I don't know when that is. In terms of how I think it will go, again, I don't know. Polling, first of all, I'm blurry. Polling flips from one side to the other quite regularly. All you can say is you can't predict the result either way. Very much like Brexit, it won't need even though it's a huge constitutional change, it won't need a supermajority. It'll just be a simple majority. The Tories would like to change that, but that would be a bit of hypocrisy there. And you've got to bear in mind, a campaign changes all sorts of things. 2016 Brexit referendum campaign was Remain all the way. Last few days, all those Russian bots flipped it. It wasn't just the Russian bots, obviously. There was other campaigns leading up to it as well. But, you could see in the polling, support for the EU in the UK, high, started to get lower towards the referendum date. flipped below 50%, back up again within a few months. So you can't call it, and because political campaigns are so effective. If they weren't, people wouldn't throw loads of money at them. So whatever polling, so it's why I say, it's interesting to look at the polling for voting intentions for the next general election, but it doesn't tell you how it's going to go in the next general election, because voting behaviour, people like to think they make reasoned decisions when they go to the polls. They don't. Some do. Most of them, it'll just depend who was whispering in their ear just before they went in. Do you know what used to happen in this country when ordinary people started to get the vote? Normal workers, only men, of course. This was well before women got it. What would happen is the local candidate, or maybe an agent of the local candidate, would get you drunk. Because there weren't that many voters. They'd get you drunk, and then they'd throw you into the voting booth, whisper the name of the candidate in your ear to tick the box. They sort of do the same thing these days, only they use newspapers instead of getting you drunk. You don't even get a drink out of it. But anyway, wasn't the first Scottish independence referendum a lot closer than the polls were predicting? I can't remember, but what I will say is the polls a few months out from a vote will always be very different to the vote itself, because, again, the strength of a campaign can win or lose you. Right? So, yeah, Alan's there saying the only poll that counts is the one on election day. That is indeed it. And that is another, that's where we've got a problem as well, in terms of, like, some people will be thinking, why are Conservatives MPs sticking by Boris Johnson at the moment? Because he's a liability to them. Today in the House of Commons, he tried to deny he was a liability, but of course he's a liability. That is why going into the local elections at the moment in England, Scotland and Wales, Conservative candidates are not putting Boris Johnson on their campaign literature. A couple of years ago, he was everywhere. If a Conservative leaflet came through your door, it had Boris Johnson's grinning face on it, like a Cheshire cat, all over the place. You can't see it anymore. It's nowhere to be. Well, the only place you'll see his face now is on, like, Labour or Lib Dem leaflets. I would say maybe the SNP as well, but I think they're probably more likely to have Douglas Ross on it. But it's it was a good question there. It says, Havel, do I think Keir had one of the best PMQs today? Now, a lot of people are saying that, and it depends what you want out of PMQs. In terms of the fact that Boris Johnson will not have enjoyed it, it's a bit like, I always use the old sporting adage, always do the opposite of what your opponent wants you to do. And Boris Johnson did not enjoy PMQs today. Does that automatically make it one of Keir Starmer's best? I would say not, and I'll tell you why. All the issues about lying at the moment. Tomorrow, Boris Johnson, he's out of the country, so he obviously knows he's going to win hands down. But there's a vote in Parliament tomorrow to decide whether they should investigate Boris Johnson's potential lies in Parliament. Now, think about how we know that because that's the issue at the moment for Parliament. Not that he broke the law. The police have dealt with that. Parliament aren't dealing with that. There's no rules against a criminal prime minister. It's ridiculous that I can understand, as I've said before, you can have some offences which will be relatively minor, and maybe you'd put this in that bracket as long as if you committed them as a normal citizen, paid your dues, did your time, reflected on it, then entered politics, okay. But if you do it as in office, you should leave office. But why do we know he was a liar? Why are all these issues about his lying in Parliament? Because Keir Starmer, on several other PMQs, laid traps. The reason we know Boris Johnson's lied in Parliament is because Keir Starmer trapped him into saying things, because Johnson just wanted to get the issue over then and there and worry about the future later, or maybe he just believed that the truth would never come out. He was that confident. But the bottom line is, whenever people prove that Boris Johnson's lied by saying this is what he said on like if you I don't know where I've got it at the moment. I have got a copy somewhere of the motion for the vote tomorrow in Parliament, and it cites various things Boris Johnson said in Parliament. Every single one of them is a response to Keir Starmer's questions. So what I would say is actually the most effective PMQs were arguably the ones where he was laying traps for Johnson, where he was getting Boris Johnson to say something that later on you can then use to expose him to the public. So although today and yesterday was the exposing Boris Johnson to the public, it was only possible because of what he'd done in the past. And I would say this as well. Although the performance today from a public engagement point of view yesterday and today was very good, I think anyone could have done it. Anyone could have done it. It was getting Johnson to say things that is the trick, and something you would argue is a real benefit of having a prosecutor actually opposite the criminal Prime Minister. But anyway, Starmer is so boring the public won't vote for Sir Neil a lot of Wokenham. You say that? You haven't seen the latest polling, have you? Let me show you the latest polling. I'm as amazed as anyone, I have to say. No, I can't find it now. Hold on, let me just go to this one. No, help, that's horrible. I should have set this up in advance. I didn't actually expect to have to do this. Right, there we go. So, the latest polling, this is for all political figures, as in politicians, past and present, the most popular. Keir Starmer's at the top now. There's Ed Balls. People are actually, someone did ask a question about Wakefield. Ed Balls is like quite popular because of Strictly Come Dancing. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Theresa May, Rishi Sunak, David Blunkett, blah, 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 blah. Boris Johnson down there. Somehow level pegging with John Major. For the Nicola Sturgeon, do bear in mind this is for the whole of the UK. So obviously Nicola Sturgeon will be quite popular in Scotland, but that's like an 11th of the population of the entire country. So, you know, some of these... So that one will be lower than would realistically be the case. But the point is that Keir Starmer is, regardless of where he is in comparison with Ed Balls even, he's the most popular politician that's actually in the Commons right now. So we'll go back to this one. So, you know, you look at the situation, you go, yeah, Keir Starmer, he doesn't have that grand charisma, but at the end of the day, and Boris Johnson does, and ordinarily you'd think, well, that's, you know, but you look at what's happening. Well, if you may or may not know, but you look at, if you're in an area where there are local elections going on right now, and I'm not, so I have to see local press reports to see what's going on. But if you're in an area where there are local elections going on, Conservative candidates are hiding their association with Boris Johnson. Now, Labour aren't exactly sticking Keir Starmer out front and centre, but they're not hiding from him either. They're not ashamed of him. Whereas Conservatives are now ashamed. But anyway, what do I think of the Chris Bryant announcement recusing himself from chairing the Committee of Privileges? My instant reaction to that, and I'm quite sure it's the right one, is he is the chair of the Privileges Committee. I actually got this wrong as well. I only noticed when James O'Brien got it wrong as well. So there's the Standards Committee and the Privileges Committee. And we've had a few things for the Standards Committee now. It's not actually the Standards Committee that this proposal is for. It's the Privileges Committee, because it relates to Boris Johnson's abuse of privilege, parliamentary privilege. So it's a slightly, used to be the same committee, now it's a different one, even though it's still the same basic people, although the Privileges Committee is only MPs. So yeah, Labour's Chris Bryant is head of it. He's been a vocal critic of Boris Johnson's lies. So the Conservatives are trying to argue, well, Boris Johnson won't, because you've got to ask yourself this: why wouldn't the Conservatives vote for an investigation if they're confident that Boris Johnson is innocent? This is an investigation of MPs, most of whom are Conservatives. The majority of the Privileges Committee are Conservative MPs. Why would Conservative MPs fear an investigation of Boris Johnson by a group that's mostly Conservative MPs? If they think he's innocent, they've got nothing to fear. It's because they know he's not. So then they come up with excuses. One excuse, well, Chris Bryant's the chair, isn't he? He won't give him a fair hearing. So Chris Bryant has basically recused himself. He's not stepping down as chair. He will still be chair of the committee. But what he said in his letter, if MPs vote to have that investigation, he'll play no part in it. He'll be the chair of the committee only when it concerns other matters. He'll completely remove himself from that investigation. So he'll play no part in it. And it's there just to stop the whips saying to MPs, well, yeah, we'd be totally fine with him having a fair investigation, but with Chris Bryant in charge, it can't possibly be fair. Well, now they can't use that line. I don't know why that's hidden. Let's put that comment there. I do not understand why Boris is thought to be charismatic. Must be a British versus Danish cultural difference. The man seems a bumblish, boring idiot to me. Well, he is. And it will be a cultural difference. In this country, we don't... Basically, I blame reality TV. I blame Big Brother, quite frankly. That's where the rot started, if I have to go into my middle-aged rant on these things. We live in a society, and this isn't isolated to the UK, we live in a society where we raise our adulation towards entertainers. If you think about it this way, it's really quite simple. You can name, the drop of a hat, 10 light entertainment stars, 10 movie stars, 10 sports stars. No problem at all. How many Nobel Prize winners that won last year, of any field, could you name? Or any other grand prizes for whatever? You know, anything that's not entertainment, anything that's important, engineering, science, even like more esoteric entertainment, maybe like literature or something like that. The people who do things, how many of them can you really name? Sometimes you get someone stunningly famous and you go, oh, Elon Musk. But why do you know Elon Musk? Because he's a buffoon as well. He's not a buffoon in the same sense, but you know, he's a showman, he's an entertainer. That's why you know him. You don't know him because of his engineering, his work in engineering. You know him because he's a showman. You know, so we live in this society where we look to and aspire to be, you know, like an idiot, an actual idiot, a vacuous idiot, goes on the telly, makes it big on Big Brother, something like that, eats an ostrich's anus, and then becomes the culture secretary. You know, that's the society we live in. And I think you get a bit of this in a few countries, but we seem to be particularly badly affected here. Like, if I went down the street and I was just to ask someone, name me one, just on a British street, name me one British professor, like British scientist, all I'd get is Cox. And why? Because he's on the telly. You know, some people will be thinking Stephen Hawking is not even alive anymore. You know, but only ones who've also transcended the science to reach out to the public. Ordinary ones, just ones doing their normal jobs, no one's heard of them. Anyway, rant over. Have I Got News for You isn't to blame, there were warnings. Does someone blame Have I Got News for You? I used to watch that. When it first came out, I watched it for several years, and then I stopped watching it when they started bullying Angus Deaton. Well, not when they started. I didn't mind one episode of bullying because he deserved it. But then they went a bit mad, so I never watched a single one after that. But there you go. Right, I'm just going to try and pick through ones that will be relatively related to the twin issues of, as I say, having a criminal in charge of the government and having a serial liar. Because at the moment, they're both pretty bad. Didn't realise ostrich was one of Johnson's nicknames. TV stars now, social media influencers next. Be careful what you wish for. I don't think anyone's going to raise me on a platform to the same extent. Do I think the Rwanda policy is a game changer in local elections? No. I mean, obviously I'm not going to try and say I'm fully tuned into what the British public think. But again, if you look, I did that video on the poll that was in the Mail on Sunday. And if you looked at that, and okay, I've no particular reason to doubt the poll. I didn't see exactly how it was presented, and I didn't see exactly what sort of responses there were. But it did suggest that asylum and immigration are not a big issue for people. It was considered a top issue for 7% of people. And the way the poll was presented heavily implied that it wasn't just asking what people thought their one top issue was. It suggested they could tick as many as they like. Now, it might not have been. It might have been you could only tick 3 or something. I don't know. But it certainly heavily implied you could pick multiple. If only 7% consider asylum and immigration to be a top issue, it's not going to be a big issue at the local elections at all. Especially when you consider where the local elections mostly are. It's not in these little pockets of where you generally get asylum issues being stoked. Next year's local elections will be, bear in mind, local elections are not, they're very, very different. Like this year's local elections will have a very different character to next year's local elections. This year's local elections are largely metropolitan areas. Not exclusively, but largely metropolitan areas. It's not a lot of the sort of industrialised pro-Brexit areas. There's a few of them, not that many. Next year's will be. So this year, like, I'm trying to avoid people getting too hyped for Labour. Labour are not going to make strong gains this year because there's not much to gain. There isn't much to gain. The Lib Dems and the Greens could take a lot off the Conservatives. Labour not so much. Next year is different. And it probably works out well. On the one hand, it'd be nice to have a local election where Labour had a really good prospect of winning a load of seats, just to keep the pressure on Johnson. But the long-term view is it is probably better that they happen next year, because if we're getting ready for a general election in 2024, then having a really dominant local election campaign the year before would be very powerful for Labour. We've got some old fogies coming in as well. Or I don't know, you may just be a historian, Mitch, there. If you compare the talk British shows and entertainment of the 60s and 70s to the cheap discourse of today, the attempt to distract the electorate is obvious. I don't know. I mean, maybe not. I'm not an aficionado of chat shows either now or in the past. I am aware that when Harold Wilson left office, he became a chat show host and was rubbish. So he didn't have anything to say. But anyway, Starmer needs to get on TikTok then. Yes, he does. Labour need to get themselves on all the social media platforms. Unfortunately, they won't. They are. It's maddening. On the one hand, I'm pleased that Labour seem to be taking elections seriously now. Instead of saying, this is what we represent, take it or leave it, and then going, what do you mean you'll leave it? What do you mean you've given us the Tories back in power? What the? Instead of doing that, they're going, right, okay, here are the people who vote. What do you want? Oh, you want this? Okay, we don't like that. Oh, you want this? Well, that's actually in line with what we want. So it's not like moulding your policies around just what the majority of voters seem to want, especially when they're educated largely by the Daily Mail and the Daily Express. But what it is about doing is saying, okay, we align on these issues and you focus on those issues to the exclusion of all else if necessary. So I'm pleased that they're doing that. I'm less pleased that they have no idea how social media works. No idea. Like Graham Hughes, who many of you will know, has been trying to get, and he has successfully got through to them and been talking to them, but they won't have it. You know. Anyway. Probably been said before that my audio has a very strong left bias. Or does it? Oh, it's not been put in that term before, but yes, okay. It is still on my list. Never mind. Are PMQs obsolete? No, but they are very different now. Obviously, the way PMQs used to work, it was damage limitation for the Prime Minister, right? So the Prime Minister went out there, the MPs would ask them questions. if they were having a really bad time, their own MPs would ask them awkward questions, but certainly the opposition MPs would ask them questions. The leader of the opposition gets 6 questions, so they get to really put you under the cosh. I mean, anyone else, like the second largest opposition party, the SNP at the moment, only get 2. So there's not, you can have a lead in and then a follow up. There's nothing after that. 6 questions allows you to really pin down the Prime Minister. And the trick was to try and trap the Prime Minister into saying something that would be unpopular. So that was the political game. And it was all based, the rules of the game were that the Prime Minister could obviously try and mislead, but they couldn't lie. They couldn't actually lie. Well, Boris Johnson isn't playing by those rules. So from that point of view, Prime Minister's questions now takes on a very different role. It is, as it always was in a way, an appeal to the public. But now it has to be and this is why, if Tory MPs at the moment, or just Conservative supporters in general, are sick and tired of Labour going on about cake, as they put it, even though it's got nothing to do with cake. We were going on about this long before we even knew about a cake. But if they're complaining that Labour are constantly on at this, and others as well, not just Labour, but they get the most questions, then they should reflect on the fact this is because nothing Boris Johnson says at the dispatch box can be trusted. So all Labour can do now, all they can do in PMQs, is point out to the public that Boris Johnson is fundamentally untrustworthy. What is the point in asking him questions on aspects of policy, which is what's supposed to happen? I agree there. Prime Minister's questions should be asking the Prime Minister questions about government policy. But how can it be when the Prime Minister will not answer those questions truthfully? Even given that they may be evasive about them or present it in language that could be a little bit misleading because they don't want to walk into traps. But if he's just going to straight up lie, what's the point in asking him about policies? Because he will say his policy is one thing on one day and another on the other day. So all you can do is point out how untrustworthy Boris Johnson is. And in that vein, I noticed just now the Conservatives are trying to paint Keir Starmer as dishonest. Didn't I say, for those who've watched it in my video on PMQs that came out earlier today, that when Keir Starmer said about the Boris Johnson criticising the BBC last night, and Boris Johnson tried to say, no, I didn't do that at all. And I said, there'll be more to this, because the Conservatives are now, they know that Boris Johnson's a liar. They know that the public know Boris Johnson's a liar. So therefore they know they can't trust a word he says. So what do you do in that situation? Strategically thinking, what do you do if you're a Tory strategist? You can't stop the public thinking Boris Johnson's not a liar, because he is. And everyone who's not completely blinkered, anyone who still believes he might be telling the truth now is beyond hope. So what do? You try and convince the public that everyone's as bad, that Keir Starmer's just as bad. Oh yeah, Boris Johnson might be a liar, but so's Keir Starmer. With that regard, where is it? Oliver Dowden has written to Keir Starmer accusing him of misleading the House and saying he should come to the House, correct the record, apologise to Boris Johnson, and while he's at it, he should apologise for serving in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet as well. It's hilarious in many ways, this letter, but it's, in fact, I'll link it in the chat in case anyone wants to read it for themselves. It is hilarious in many ways, but at the same time it is also serious in that it's what they're trying to do is to get members of the public to think that Keir Starmer is just as dishonest, because I don't know that a lot of people place a lot of importance on honesty in politics, because people sort of think politicians are generally dishonest anyway. But Boris Johnson is dishonest on a whole other level. And the public are feeling that. Or some of the public, key voting members of the public are feeling it. So yeah, this is a tactic. It's a tactic here to try and tar Starmer with the same brush. And Labour will need to be wise to that. Loved your show for 2 years, still watch you daily, but you must realise Scotland will be independent. I hope we'll still be friends. Well, I would like to be friends with everyone. I'd like to be friends with people in Russia, even though I think their governments are... Won't say the word I'm thinking. At the same time, nothing is certain. Nothing is certain. You never give up. I would be very sad if that day came, but it is what it is. Do I think Boris will be leading the Tories into the next election? As cynical as it sounds, is this the best outcome for Labour? It is the best outcome for Labour. That one's easy. Will he still be leading it? It's really difficult. Like, on the one hand, I just keep looking at it and thinking, no, he can't be leading them into the next election. They'd be insane too. But here's the thing. Who do you replace him with? Who is there that could win them the next election? Because here's the thing. Imagine 3 outcomes for an election, right? So, obviously Conservative MPs want to win the next election. That means to get a majority. That's one outcome. That's what they want. 2, that they lose their majority but can still form a government, like Theresa May in 2017. Or 3, that they lose so badly that Labour form a government, whether a minority government or whatever, but Labour form a government. So those are the 3 outcomes, right? Now, Boris Johnson is not in the one that wins you the next election. So does that automatically mean you get rid of him? Well, not necessarily. Because what if you believe that he won't lose as badly as someone else might? Let's say you think, okay, well, let's put Liz Truss in charge. But then you think, no, but Liz Truss, I think, will lose the election even worse than Johnson. If you don't think there's someone better than Boris Johnson, they might stick with him, even if they think he's going to lose them the election, because it becomes a how many seats will he lose us type issue. And at that point, the only people who will want rid of him are the ones whose seats are going to be lost, like the Red Wall Tories. But at the end of the day, there's not enough of them to get rid of him. There's no left way, just the right way. Well, thank you for that, but that's a little bit cryptic. If I missed something else. But anyway. Jeremy Hunt, but without the red wall. Well, because this is the issue, isn't it? Like, Jeremy Hunt can't appeal to those red wall voters. Liz Truss can't appeal to those red wall voters. Rishi Sunak can't. Sajid Javid can't. Who can? Who is there? Are you going to give Mark Francois a crack at it? I don't think so. And if they abandon the red wall, 2 things happen. First of all, they'll be asking, so where are you going to get the seats to win us a majority then? Nowhere. And second of all, those red wall Tories don't fancy losing their seats. What are they going to think to it? They're not going to go along with that plan. So the Conservative Party could rupture here. Now, I'm always hesitant to do that because for too many years, Labour kept thinking Brexit would break the Conservative Party. Arguably, actually broke the Labour Party. But this issue could still break the Conservative Party. Not to pieces, not smash it up. It has too much money behind it. For 200 odd years, it has been the party of the wealthy. It looks after moneyed interests. It will always exist. But in terms of their politicians, they could well split, because the only thing unifying them is the fact that Boris Johnson gave them this massive majority. And at the moment, we're still only halfway through. They don't have to sweat it right now. There's no real urgency. The only urgency is if now they're going to support Boris Johnson as a criminal, and they're going to block an investigation into whether he's lied to Parliament. Because remember, this vote tomorrow isn't whether he lied to Parliament, it's just whether there should be an investigation. What good reason can you have for blocking an investigation like that? Especially when most of the actual judges are Tory MPs. If they can't trust their own, what the hell? So the only sense of urgency is, do Tory MPs, by voting for Boris Johnson tomorrow, when Boris Johnson won't even be voting for himself, he's off in India. He's on his way, he's in the sky right now as far as I know. So are they going to permanently damn themselves? Is this something that in 2 years' time will still be used against them? Labour will use it against them. Labour will be throwing leaflets through the letterboxes in 2.5 years' time saying your local MP voted to keep a criminal Prime Minister in office and blocked an investigation into his dishonesty. Brexit will break the Labour Party again. Starmer can't reintroduce freedom of movement. UK population doesn't want it. I don't think that's true. But what the UK population does and doesn't want, unfortunately, when it doesn't vote, is neither here nor there. What matters is what the key voters want, which is a few 100,000 people. It would be different if everyone went out and voted. You know, if we had an Australia style, everyone has to vote, it would be different. If we had proportional representation, it would be different again. There's several things that would make it different. But in the political system we have right now, the only opinions that matter are those of swing voters in like 100 seats. Maybe 150 at most, but around about 100 seats. That's it. So what do those people think? And that's where it's really difficult, because when you look at national polling, it's like, don't know. So when I said before that only 7% of people really care about asylum and immigration as an electoral issue, well, that's of the overall population. I mean, if it's a much stronger issue amongst those key voters in those marginal constituencies, well, that's a different matter. But I just don't think it is. I think it's more evenly spread. Could the French elections on Sunday affect the UK local elections? I think we're probably a bit too insular for that. Because if Marine Le Pen, say, did win, that would be a dark day, wouldn't it? If that happened, I don't know that the ramifications would really feed through to people voting the week after, or a couple of weeks after rather, in this country. You know, I don't think we don't really pay very much attention. I think most people will be sort of aware there are elections going on in France, and they'll be sort of aware it's between the current president and a far right BNP nutter, or FNP in her case, I suppose. But you know. The UK government needs an independent inspector general. If Johnson was here in the United States, he might be in jail now or impeached for his cronyism. Would he? What's happening with Trump then? Because I would argue that Donald Trump has been at least as destructive in office as Boris Johnson. At least, maybe more so. Because Boris Johnson was at least constrained by his MPs. When his MPs got, I know they're not the greatest guardians of morality, but at the same time, when their constituents were haranguing them, you know, they had some sway over him. Whereas Trump seemed to be, and still seems to be, very much in control of the Republican Party in a way that Boris Johnson isn't. The Republicans cannot drop Trump. Even though he's lost, they can't drop him. Boris Johnson can be dropped. He's not in charge of the Conservative Party. And if he were to lose an election, he would be gone. There'd be no suggestion of him carrying on. None at all. He'd be resigning the same day. So, you know, I'm not really sure that there is an easy, you know, there is going to have to be a question about this in the future at some point, not now, because we don't have the political will. There's going to have to be a discussion at some point as to what you do to stop someone like Boris Johnson gaining power again. America will have to do the same thing with Trump as well. But none of this will happen until the players have gone, because there won't be the political will for it at the moment. Where was I? Yes, sorry, I was talking about the old freedom of movement came back up. Change freedom of movement to obligation to pay tax for EU migrants. That will make it easy to accept. I can absolutely, I don't dismiss the notion that if Labour were to win power, that Brexit wouldn't cause them a lot of problems, because it would. We know that what is sensible in terms of Brexit policies and what would be in line with core Labour values is not exactly in line with the path they need to beat to win the election. So there is a disconnect between the rhetoric that Labour are having to use and the policies that they will have to put in place. And they're trying to tread a fine line between the two. And it will work for a time, because remember, Labour have ruled out freedom of movement, sure enough, but they have said closer alignment with the EU. Well, you have to do that first anyway. But then what? It really becomes like this. If Labour win a majority, a working majority, then it becomes, ironically, more difficult for them. If Labour don't win a majority, or a working majority, if they need the support of other parties, it actually becomes a much easier issue to deal with. Not an easy issue still, but an easier issue. Because if Labour need the support of the Lib Dems and the SNP, the Lib Dems especially, the SNP may have other political priorities, but the Lib Dems and the SNP are both in favour of freedom of movement, and so they may well say to Labour, "Hear me, old chap, you want our help, do you? Nice one. We'd like you to drop this silly nonsense about no more freedom of movement." You know, and it could well, I have sometimes thought, do Labour strategists have this in mind? Because they must surely be contemplating. In fact, do you know what? It's not sure. I know from people who work behind the scenes that Labour and the Lib Dems are discussing policies right now, so that when the election is over, if Labour get enough seats to form a government, even a minority government, I know that they're already in discussions with the Lib Dems about common areas, common policy areas. So Labour must be factoring in the manifesto promises that might need to be compromised on. In other words, it's a little bit like David Cameron in 2015. They may be able to present certain things. We don't know what the manifesto will say at this point. Obviously, it's not written. But they may be able to say things in such a way as to say, well, we wouldn't favour this policy, without ruling out bringing the policy in if they need others for support. So I would be suggesting that the realistic outcome for the next election, if the Tories don't win, the Tories could still win. They could still win. But if they don't, a realistic outcome is not a working majority for Labour. I don't see where the seats come from. A realistic outcome is a minority Labour government needing the SNP and the Lib Dems support, which opens up an awful lot of Brexit policies. PR has to be the number one demand for coalition. See, for me, interesting, I was reading, I've still got it up, John McDonnell writing for Labour List. It's a little bit sneaky what he's written, but on the face of it, it's a call for Labour to support proportional representation. There is now a clear majority of the Labour membership in support of proportional representation. The leadership, I think, probably are as well, but Keir Starmer has even spoken publicly in support of it, but as a manifesto promise, I don't think so, because it's electorally charged. It presents certain traps, but there is a real push for proportional representation. So what I would say is, it's not at all a top priority in opposition, but for me it is the top priority in government. If Labour can form a government, I want serious electoral reform in place. Basically, if Labour win power under obviously first past the post, I want it to be the last time a Westminster general election is decided on first past the post. Now, how politically easy it is to accomplish that is another matter, but that is what I want the focus to be. Because it doesn't matter what Labour do in power. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how much they reverse Brexit. Doesn't matter how much they reverse privatisation. Doesn't make any difference. What they do, if they allow the political system to survive that can bring in not just a conservative majority voted in by a minority of people, but an extreme right-wing conservative majority pushed by a minority of people. If they allow that electoral system to remain, Whatever they achieve will be swept away in no time, because it can take you 10 years to build something in this country, and it takes 1 year for the Tories to sell it off again when they come back in power. So no policy, doesn't matter. Nothing can be kept in place with first past the post. First past the post is the absolute enemy of right now of democracy. Can't hear me? Oh, hopefully that's something, problem at your end. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I'd be met with a barrage of people saying they can't hear me. Apparently, it's only broadcasting in mono, though. So if you do what I sometimes do and have headphones on but only have one thing to the ear, you might have to change the ear. What now? Right, let's try and find the last 10 minutes. I watch Scottish Parliament all the time. We don't have a bear pit. They have differences, but there's respect. I think part of that will be as well. I wouldn't actually put all the blame for that even on Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. I think it's a bit of a tradition. Obviously, Holyrood, I mean, Scottish Parliament has existed for centuries as well, but in terms of Holyrood as it exists now is relatively new. And what happens when you have a new system? People look at it with more modern, they try and look at it, what's the best way to do this? Westminster has been around for centuries, and it's interesting you call it a bear pit because it's very much like that. The problem is the behaviour is often very poor. It is, we'd call it childish, but as I always say, really, there isn't really such a thing as, well, there is a few. Most of what we call childish behaviours are not childish at all. They're human behaviours that most children are encouraged to drop. Such as lying, for example. There are various things, or sulking when you don't get your own way. There are certain behaviours that we call childish because they're mostly exhibited in children, because the vast majority of good parents don't let their children grow up with those behaviours. Occasionally some slip through, but and Westminster has been going for so long, and it's comfort, and it's, some people find it brilliant. They think it's great entertainment. They think it's fantastic entertainment. Do you know what? I reckon most people rubbish Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, not because they think he's not doing a good enough job. I think it's just because he's not entertaining enough, in all honesty. But people like it for some reason. I don't know why. It's embarrassing, I think, the behaviour. But it is just because it's the way it is now. People join the House of Commons as a new MP. They witness this behaviour. They're told that this behaviour is how things done. They adopt the behaviour. And it's a bit like chanting in a football crowd, isn't it? When, the fans all start one of their chants, and you go along as you've not been to a football match before, and you go along and you don't join in because you don't know what all the chants are about, and eventually you learn the chants, and then you're doing the chants, and it's just the same thing. Unfortunately, it's just so ancient, and it would be nice if we just had a complete reset, move Parliament to Doncaster, change it to proportional representation, have it as a whole new building, a whole new electoral process, and then maybe they'd re-look at some of the, throw Erskine May in the bin, have a look at the rules and change them, and maybe we behave much more like as you say, a more respectful legislature. But that one, as I say, I don't pin the blame for that on any MPs that are around now, because it's how it's been for years. It is a bear pit. So there's another thing that needs reform. The Common House is not a parliament, it's a classroom of unruly boys. Just listen to the noise level. And actually, now that you've just brought to mind as well with that analogy, which you are quite right, I think another problem is, and this probably doesn't, I don't know, maybe someone should look it up, this probably doesn't apply to the Scottish or even Welsh Parliament either. I think part of the problem also is that the House of Commons is stuffed with quite a lot of public school boys. For those in America, that means privately educated. We call it public school here. I know it's weird. I'm not calling for revolution. Phil calling for a revolution now. I always say, actually, whenever people say, oh, when are people going to rise up and stuff like that, it's like, why would they? All you have, revolutions are for people under actual autocracies. We're not. Yes, it's becoming more and more like a dictatorship. The democratic institutions are failing, but it is still democracy. People can still go along to the ballot box with you get a pencil there. You don't have to take a pen with you. Take your ID with you these days, though. You can just go along and you put a cross in a box, put it in the right box, and the whole thing goes away. The problem's solved. Yes, we'll have other problems, but still. Lord York's, they said they were moving it to York. That was just Boris Johnson, wasn't it? I would pay no attention to that. Boris Johnson basically went, we should have some levelling up. There's bits of the north of England that have been left behind. Vote for me and I'll give you a parliament. There's no plans to move any part of Parliament to York. Anyway, it should be Doncaster. York keeps voting Tory. Doncaster started a little bit at the last election, but I have every faith that it will swing back. 2/3 of it's still Labour. But anyway. No, Hoyle is a risible Speaker of the House. He's let Bozo get away with anything he likes and come down on any MP who calls a spade a spade. He himself is bringing the House into disrepute. I'm afraid I am going to have to defend him again. I'm not saying he's doing the best job that a Speaker could, but I think a lot of people assume he has power he doesn't. And also, I will point out today, no, was it today or was it yesterday? I think it might have been both, actually. But certainly yesterday, when Keir Starmer gave his speech, bear in mind, when all those Tory MPs started moaning and Keir Starmer, you called him dishonest, Hoyle wasn't straight on that. He actually said he was actually telling the Conservative MPs to shut up. Now, it is true that using the word dishonest is unparliamentary and the Speaker is supposed to tell him to retract it. But he didn't make a big song and dance about it. Another thing that happened is, later on, another MP basically called Boris Johnson a liar. Speaker told him to withdraw it. He didn't, to my mind, really withdraw it. But the Speaker acted as if he did. So I think the Speaker actually, if you look at when he has had to talk to MPs about withdrawing remarks, I think if you listen to what the MP in question has said after it, I don't think MPs have been withdrawing those remarks, and yet the Speaker sat down satisfied. I actually think that the Speaker is, and again, I can still accept that he's maybe could still do better, but I think he's not coming down hard on people calling him a liar at the moment, because I think he knows everyone still is. But anyway. What do I think of Newark in shock as largest employer shuts up shop and heads for the EU? Well, interestingly enough, I've got a video, not specifically on that, I do mention it, I think, about why businesses in general are doing just this. So that is actually tomorrow. But it's obvious, you raise trade barriers, therefore you make it harder to trade. So what are you going to do? Well, if your customers are on the other side of the barrier, you move your operations to the other side of the barrier. It's not rocket science, which is just as well. But anyway, right, last little question, and then I'll have to sum up. Bozo calls Starmer Captain Hindsight every week. Hoyle does nothing about it. That is true. I will actually say that. I tell you what I will say though is the Speaker doesn't generally intervene. Even like they don't generally intervene unless there's I can't think of words now. An objection. Keir Starmer hasn't actually objected to the Speaker about it. So you could argue the Speaker's taken the view that Starmer doesn't care. Whereas when the Speaker has sort of told Starmer to, withdraw a certain comment or something like that, it's because load of Tory MPs have objected. So it could be that. I would still say that probably the Speaker should do it unilaterally, but it does tend to be the case that the Speaker largely doesn't interfere unless there's a point of order raised. But anyway, will this mountain of party photos, videos become public? I do hope so. The police won't release it, and obviously Downing Street won't release it. I do hope someone does, on whatever basis. Some of it will have to come out. But anyway, that's it for tonight. I'll tell you how this is going to go over the next couple of weeks. So for the rest of this month, will basically be one on Saturday. It may or may not be on Wednesday. I think it probably will be on Wednesday, unless another time becomes more suitable. Then the idea is from May, I'll open up memberships, and then the idea will be there will be a Saturday stream that will be streamed live, but it'll just be members that can, because I can't read all these comments anyway, and then people will complain that some of them are rude. But I'm afraid I've missed most of the comments, so I'm sorry about that. Especially when I go off on one, I can't read them all. So it'll just be members responding. There'll be another stream that won't be that'll only be for second-tier members, but that's for members. And then once a month, I will do a fully public one again that will be designed to raise funds for a charity. That seems to be topical at the time. But thanks very much anyway. Thanks for coming on. And if any of you are about on Saturday at the same time, I will see you then.